This is the house that is allegedly undermined by
tunnels and bunkers underneath the home,
involving the death of a young man.
I want back my son.
The whole story surrounding this just keeps getting stranger.
He's an unusual character, a paranoid fixation on North Korea ballistic missiles.
In a quiet suburb, investigators uncovered a complex system of tunnels and bunkers, a victim, and a mysterious crypto-millionaire, setting the stage for one of the strangest modern-day fables. In the afternoon of September 10th, 2017, at approximately 4 p.m., a man named Bruce LaShawn noticed smoke coming from one of his neighbor's house and a loud voice yelling, "Get out! Get out!" Bruce decided to call the police and rush over to his neighbor's house to see what was going on.
Now, all of this happened literally just above my own backyard. I was the first person on the scene of the fire. I tried to get into the burning house to rescue Kafra, but it was just too dangerous. And when I yelled in, "Are you in there? Is anybody in there?" there was no response.
A panicked, shirtless man rushing out of his house with his body covered in dirt. Bruce recognized him as the home's occupant, Daniel Beckwith. Before we continue, it's crucial to understand who Daniel is. At a young age, Daniel Beckwith's parents kept him isolated throughout his childhood, which resulted in him being an introvert and a little socially awkward. Back in 2000, Daniel's father, David, was diagnosed with Parkinson's, so his mother, Linda, chauffeured her husband and son everywhere in their gold Honda Odyssey. Their neighbors mentioned that whenever the neighborhood children would get too close to their property line, Linda shouted at them until they would run away. Few people would ever go into the house, but someone who did described it as chaotic with papers, books, and food cartons on every available surface, which we will talk more about later on. Linda felt that Daniel was a genius as he could read as a toddler. Linda decided to homeschool him because she felt that the local schools were a threat to his intellectual development. Impressively, Daniel completed high school at the age of just 15. While he and his family were closed off from the real world, Daniel would rarely be seen to go out to play with the neighborhood kids, but when he would leave, he would always be seen with his parents. Due to his isolation, Daniel eventually found an online community on a website called 4chan.
Who is this 4chan person or website?
4chan is an anonymous online image board forum that was known for its free-spirited and often controversial nature, which later bred thousands of people on the dark side of the internet. It not only gave birth to some of the internet's biggest memes, but was also the platform responsible for spawning the internet hacker group Anonymous.
Greetings world, we are Anonymous.
The site even led a viral campaign that would send Justin Bieber to perform in North Korea in 2010. Similar to Reddit, 4chan has been a source for internet culture while fostering both creative discussions and at times problematic behaviors. 4chan was a place where Daniel could anonymously post about his interests such as head transplants and gory substances. This screams red flags, and I wonder at the time if anyone else knew about this. He would also express his fear of death on the platform and use this site to express his thoughts for over a decade. In 2010, Daniel finally had the courage to leave his parents' house and attend college at the University of Illinois. As he hopped on the train at the Rockville station, for the first time in his life, he was setting out on his own. But this is where his life completely shifted, because just a couple months after he arrived at the university, his mother unfortunately passed away. She found a lump on her breast but decided to not see a doctor in time. At the funeral, only 3 close relatives showed up. In the Washingtonian Post, it was mentioned that Daniel said, "I'm only 19. How am I supposed to deal with this?" Sadly, this was a clear indication that no one was there for Daniel. And in my opinion, one of the factors that would be an integral reason for his timeline to change for the worse. Shortly after his mother's death, Daniel decided to return to college and continue attending the university. In 2012, an instructor was arriving one morning to find that his door was super glued shut and he couldn't get it to open. He decided to call the police, but when they arrived, they discovered that dozens of exterior locks and card swipes on a computer science laboratory were filled with a similar goo substance. The university had to spend more than $20,000 to replace the keys for the entire building. Although that's nothing compared to student loans, there was a hacker in the school that needed to be caught in order to prevent future incidents like this. About a year later, the police showed up to Daniel's house because Daniel had a search warrant. Authorities tracked his name being related to the university theft. As the police entered his room, they quoted, "The room was riddled with trash, electrical wires, partially eaten food, computer equipment, and dirty clothes." The investigators found something even more important, the keys to the lab building. They also found out that Daniel, recently before the house search, gave a speech at a hackers conference on how to remotely destroy hard drives. Ironically, the police found his laptop sitting on top of a mini fridge, opened and unencrypted. According to the investigatory files, it was said that authorities found racist messages that he'd written, a cache of social security numbers and documents that connected him to a bunch of hacked emails. Shortly after the search, Daniel was arrested and charged with multiple felonies, including computer fraud. Now that you know a little about Daniel, let's get back to the story. As Bruce rushed over to Daniel's house, Bruce asked him if he was okay. Daniel shouts, "He's in the basement!" Bruce ran to the basement door, but it was too late. Everything was in flames. Soon after, the firefighters doused the flames and uncover a naked man, completely charred. He was pronounced dead at the scene. At the time, they didn't know who it was, but he was later identified as Askia Kafra. You might be wondering who Askia is and how he ended up in this situation. Before I answer that, it's important to go back and have a better understanding of who he was.
I have really good memories of him because he was just such a nice, kind person.
Askia Kafra comes from immigrant parents from Trinidad, growing up in a comfortable middle-class environment. His mother worked as a teacher, while his father, an inventor with a host of crazy designs that he wanted to patent, instilled in him a spirit of creativity and innovation from an early age.
My name is Dia Kafra. I am father of Askia Kafra.
From his youth, Askia had grand aspirations, yearning for a life of luxury. At 18, he got a taste of this lifestyle when he received a substantial settlement from a lead poisoning case amounting to hundreds of thousands of dollars. However, his lavish spending quickly depleted his newfound wealth within a year. Rather than dampening his spirits, this experience fueled a burning desire for more success, pushing him to conceive a plan to amass wealth by developing an app. Askia's friends admired his determination and dream. Even though he was smart and ambitious, he was sometimes naive. Once, he accidentally gave personal information to a stranger and almost got caught in a check-cashing scam. His naivety made him easily influenced and unaware of dangers, which, unfortunately, will be a problem later on in his life. This is leading up to where Daniel and Askia's timelines will converge. Daniel found out that his mother had left a trust fund worth over $2.6 million. With that money, he would make some really smart investments in the crypto space to make him over $16 million. This was enough money for him to get started on his ambitious plan, creating a tunnel system. Daniel bought all of the supplies he would need, chose a spot in his basement, and began to dig. At the time of 2015, Daniel discovered a new app called Blab, which was a video chat site where people could broadcast to strangers. It's similar to a platform like Twitch or Kick, but most people would be anonymous by wearing masks or other cover-ups. Daniel's username was 3 Alarm Lamp Scooter and got a following by holding himself up as a Bitcoin millionaire and investor.
All right, we're going to go ahead and turn the time over to 3 Alarm, and he's going to go ahead with his presentation.
Okay, so why are you all intently staring at some weird dude in a fire proximity suit?
Daniel would stream himself on a live video call inside of his tunnel and work while thousands of people were watching him. Askia was a fan and would regularly watch his streams. You see, Askia and his business partner, Chiaquinta, founded an app called Equity Sharks, a venture they believed would propel them to success and wealth. In Askia's eyes, Daniel was the missing piece of the puzzle, the key to reaching their ultimate goal, the one who would finance their startup company. So, he took the opportunity to message him, and Daniel answered and was interested enough to meet up. On a Sunday in June of 2016, Daniel and Askia planned to meet in person at a hookah bar in Rockville. As Askia and his business partner arrived at the hookah bar, they sat down, waiting for Daniel. As Daniel entered, they saw that he was wearing a cap and welding goggles that hid his eyes. Daniel admitted to wearing a bulletproof vest and said, "You gotta stay safe on these streets." And the boys laughed. Daniel ended up being interested and was impressed with his business plan. More meetings followed and a contract was signed. One night in the fall, Daniel slipped his new partners $5,000 in cash with the understanding that he'd be paid back out of the Teal funds, and if the fellowship didn't end up working out, Chiaquinta recalls Daniel saying, "You'll have to repay me some other way." So, with the $10,000 collectively between Askia and Chiaquinta, they booked their flights and head to California, though they booked their flight to LAX, not realizing that San Francisco was the location of their meeting. Because of this, they were late and it cost them the meeting with Teal funds. At this point, they nearly spent all of their cash, but they needed to show some progress on their app's user interface, which would mean that they would need more money to hire a developer. Askia texted Daniel saying, "We could and will all become billionaires from this, but we need you to move forward." Daniel ghosted him for weeks. Askia came up with an idea and texted this to Daniel. A few weeks later, Daniel finally responded. He needed help with his tunnel system and offered Askia $150 per day to help dig. One day, Daniel would pick up Askia, blindfold him on the drive to the property because Daniel was terrified that any outsiders might storm the place, seeking food and shelter if they heard an attack was happening. Askia accepted the blindfold as a precaution. As Askia arrived, Daniel guided him to the basement where he could finally take off the blindfold. Daniel provided him with goggles and a hard hat. The hole was about 15 feet deep. As you make your way down the hole, the tunnels were enormous, branching off in opposite directions and reaching over 100 feet at their deepest points. Daniel had power running from the basement. This is where Askia would sleep during his stay in the fallout shelter for days at a time. The room had a single bed, microwave, mini fridge, a ceiling fan, and even Wi-Fi, although it was very slow and would sometimes lose service. Askia would sleep with his hard hat on just in case of any emergency. You're probably wondering how Askia would use the restroom. He would use a 5-gallon bucket, and whenever it was full, they would attach it to a pulley and would message Daniel. Daniel would also throw food down a hole that was connected to the surface of the house. He spent most of his time on his computer upstairs, and he didn't even own a cell phone, so they would send messages through Google Chats. In the bunker, there was also a shower head, but it would make the floors muddy, so Askia would wash himself with wet wipes every day. Although Askia wasn't allowed in the house, he was able to go up to the basement if the internet was ever not working. In April of 2017, Daniel gave Askia a task to chisel a chamber that led to the outside. The only problem was that Askia would have to squeeze through a coffin-like space. This was the conversation that he had with his girlfriend named Bailey at the time.
I start to feel uneasy after like 20 minutes. I can only crawl out backwards and my hands have to be over my head. I almost freaked out. This is so claustrophobic.
Don't keep doing it if it makes you uncomfortable.
OMG, so he convinced me to try again.
He shouldn't be pushing you to do it.
You make me sound so fragile. I just feel like I need an exit strategy in case there's an earthquake or something. There's no getting out fast enough the long way.
Askia's parents knew the basic details of Askia's job. Their 21-year-old son was helping a paranoid millionaire dig tunnels. Askia would arrive at home and his parents would notice the thick dirt all over his body. Askia's parents wanted nothing but his son to be safe and around good influences in his life. In this Washingtonian blog, it stated, over time, the Khafras noticed Askia's interests shifting worryingly in Daniel's direction. Askia started monitoring North Korea's nuclear program, buying armored vests, and talking about weird science, such as the human-pig hybrid embryo a team of Korean scientists had reportedly created. As the digging wore on, Dia worried that the tunnels would cave in. Claudia repeatedly asked Askia to quit. Askia refused, accusing his parents of infantilizing him. Askia wanted to continue to work for Daniel, but stopped for a short amount of time. Askia was still in talks with the Teal Fellowship, who were interested in their business Equity Shark. However, they soon passed on them when they lost interest. They were suddenly on the hook for the cash. Jaya Quinta, his business partner, was working at a gym to pay off his half to Daniel. Askia, on the other hand, tried to get investors all summer, but when that didn't work, he practically begged Daniel to work in the tunnels to keep the app afloat. Daniel agreed to give him 2 weeks of work. Askia finally had a reason to feel confident. He was able to secure a top app developer and secured a meeting with a real estate CEO who seemed interested in investing. After a few days of Askia working in the tunnels, on September 10th at 2:32 a.m., Askia sent a series of urgent messages. It was pitch black in the bunker and it had lost all airflow. He tried calling Daniel but got no answer. Daniel had fallen asleep. 6 hours later, Daniel woke up and saw the messages. He reorganized some power strips. Pretty major electrical failure, he replied. Just switched it all over to a different circuit. Still nothing down here. It's a whole nother level of darkness. Daniel made another adjustment, and the power returned. You would think that under these conditions, Askia would have come to his senses and left the tunnels, but no. He was so close to finding another investor, and he needed this money to keep going. Later that day, at 4 o'clock, Daniel heard an alarm. It was a power failure on the carbon monoxide detector. He then went to the basement and flipped the circuit breaker. As soon as he did this, he heard a buzzing sound in the kitchen. When he went to check, he could smell smoke and saw it rising from the kitchen floor. He ran back downstairs near the entrance to the tunnel, and it was hazy with smoke. Although he could barely see, he sensed Askia nearby. He said, "There's a fire. You gotta get out." All Askia said in response was, "Yo, dude," and that would be the last time he heard his voice.
So you make it to here and you're like, "Hey,
Askia, you gotta get out, fire."
And he says,
"Yo, dude."
What's the affect? He's like, "Yo, dude," or he's like, "Yo, dude," or
it sounded more like, "Yo, dude." Sort of like that.
Okay.
At this point, there was so much smoke that Daniel had to go outside to catch his breath. He went in one more time and he could see flames rising in the basement. "Get out! Get out!" he shouted, but he couldn't see Askia. Daniel gets out of the basement as the fire takes over. In a frenzy, he claws out the dirt in the backyard, hoping to open one of the tunnels. By now, Bruce LaShawn, the neighbor, was standing on the lawn talking to 911 as Daniel screams out to Askia over and over, but with no response. That's when the police uncovered Askia's burnt body. Later, an investigator made a startling discovery when he found a hole in the concrete floor. Investigators soon learned stretched an extensive network of tunnels and bunkers, long, twisting hallways of bare rock that would end up revealing the bizarrest of internet-era fables. It would take more than 2 weeks to clean the house. He had trash scattered everywhere, clearly indicating a hoarding problem with combustible chemicals lying on each floor. As you can assume, after the local news heard about this story, with one new revealing twist after another, it really became sensational. The revelation of the tunnels, the identity of the homeowner, the victim, and the fact that it all took place in a quiet suburban neighborhood right under their noses. Who would have expected that? After an 8-month investigation, prosecutors charged Daniel with involuntary manslaughter and second-degree murder, which alleged a disregard for human life so extreme that it amounted to willful killing. The fire's exact cause was never determined. Askia was no more than 2 steps from almost certain safety when he died.
If I tell you where Askia was found, you gonna be cool with that?
I want to know. I might be a little upset.
But Askia's found in the laundry.
Wow, I was so close to getting him.
Oh man. I was so close.
After a 7-day trial, the verdict came down as guilty. The only other sound in the courtroom was that of Daniel loudly hyperventilating. How did it get to this point? Due to Daniel's social isolation and the deterioration of his mental health following his mother's passing, coupled with the reinforcement of his paranoia within the echo chamber of 4chan, he felt compelled to put his plan into action, and it cost someone else's life. When Askia was 7 and already fantasizing about money, he made his mother a promise. He said, "One day I'll be rich, and when you die, your casket will have rubies and diamonds on it." Askia wanted the American dream. He aspired to achieve greatness in the world. Sadly, his life was taken too soon before he could fulfill those aspirations. I don't want Askia to be overshadowed by Daniel. Many people can relate to Askia's dreams and ambitions. From his story, we can draw inspiration from Askia's spirit to strive for our greatest dreams. At the same time, we must remain vigilant, recognize red flags, and avoid harmful situations. On July 23rd, 2022, Daniel was released from prison after serving just a quarter of his 9-year sentence. Was his sentencing justified? What are your thoughts? If you made it to the end, please leave a like and subscribe.